Welcome back, everybody. This is now the Becoming a Maintainer session on day 3. All the time you've been working through making contributions, we make references to the Egeria maintainers. And these are people who have done a lot of work on Egeria in the past, and also have made a commitment to the Egeria project to basically be past managers of the code base. So our maintainers have right access to the Git repository, and that means that they can merge your pull requests into the code. They provide mentoring and support this type of event. So on the call today, we have some maintainers, and so I'm going to sort of give them an opportunity to talk about what it means to them, the type of work they get involved in, and their hints and tips on how you can progress to becoming a maintainer. So do I have any volunteers to
start? This is David. I don't mind starting.
Please do, yes.
Okay. I haven't really prepared anything, so I was just really going to talk about it. My first experience was getting involved with Apache Atlas. This was the first experience of open source sort of world. We worked with Hortonworks, as they were then called, for quite a few months, and I think it was an eye-opener to all of us. We went through that because it was such a different culture that they came from, and I think it was really a sort of we added what we added, and they added what they added, and we were better for the both. So we had quite a lot of discussions with them, and a few of us ended up being Apache Atlas committed as well. So I was struck by the bringing together of the different cultures and being able to be better because it was because of the both. And also when we went to a couple of the conferences, and I was struck very much by how enthusiastic everybody was. They seemed to own personally what they were doing, which I haven't really experienced so much at sort of vendor conferences. So around about that time, I was quite interested and been doing some work with Mandy in Mandy's team around information architecture. So getting involved with master data management, data lake, understanding from customers directly how metadata worked, how information flowed, I found really interesting. And it seemed very relevant because we seemed to be talking directly to them. And I was reassured by the messages that we gave around the solutions that had been architected with reference architectures that Mandy put together, and others, with the data lake being a big one. I was struck by how they were just accepted. It was obvious that these solutions were solving problems for them, were very relevant problems, and I think there was the sort of germination of Egeria. So I've really enjoyed that time, and then moving into the sort of separation from Apache Atlas and moving into Egeria. And it's sort of carried on, and we've been able to work with varied members of the community, which I've really enjoyed. ING particularly, we've had very close relationships with, and that relationship has been a vendor, and then being as IBM, and then buying the software was a very different relationship to that which we were having now around open source. We were much more peer-to-peer, and it seemed just more relaxed and open and much more fruitful because of it. So I really enjoyed that as well. We've had, in terms of my bits that I've been involved with the semantics side of things. So the glossary, as Ernie mentioned, the subject area OMAS, and dotted through that, I've been involved with user interfaces as well. Abstract ideas. So I'm drawn to the architecture and information management. I'm drawn to the semantic view of the world, and I'm drawn to how we can showcase that in user interfaces as well. So, and Mandy has been really inspirational as a leader with all of this, and had a very light touch, being my manager. So I've been enabled to, I felt I've been able to grow in this space, and find opportunities myself, as well as discussing and sharing with Mandy with it, sharing what I'm doing with Mandy, and she's always been very supportive. So I think things we sort of missed on with the advocacy thing is having an inspirational leader is, to sort of coalesce things. I think is important. So there is a consistent vision, and I think, so. Mandy has very much been that, and I get feedback from everybody around that. Of course, we're working very much in a community, so it's not just one person. It's very much a joint effort, and I really like that way of sharing, that win-win communication, the emphasis on collaboration. That as you find, this sort of thing where you share what you're doing, even though it's not quite perfect, and giving opportunities for other people to contribute potentially early at the design stage, so that you don't end up writing code that is perfectly wrong, yeah, perfectly doing what it shouldn't be doing. So, and I think we've had a lot of those design discussions with the in issues and face to face and at conferences from all the different parts of the community. We've been involved with integrations with Palisade as well, which I thought was fascinating, because they come from a very different perspective as well, with a sort of security background. So that was my sort of my thoughts around how I got there. I think it's probably my best role that I've ever had. I really enjoy it. So that's about where that's where I am with it.
Sorry, David, I was on mute. Any advice for anybody who wants to become a maintainer?
I think just being active and vocal about what value you're seeing in the project and what you need from it, and being willing to be actually involved if you can. So I think I think if the more varied views that we have, and especially if they're active, if we have lots of people watching all the time, I don't think it's the community is really going to be very vibrant. But if we have lots of people with realizing that this solution is potentially going to change the way they do things, and I think most of us, if not all of us, believe that, then I think that once if they believe that as well, then becoming active and articulating what they need from this sort of open source project, changing it if it's not there, I think we'll be very open to that sort of conversation, because we think it would improve things.
Very nice. Anybody else?
It's Nigel here. David's given such an excellent introduction. I'm trying to work out where the gaps are. That was a very, very complete description. I think that, I guess as a maintainer, I think what ends up being important is to have an element of love and care. So I think David's talked about having the passion and excitement and wanting to go out and advocate for the project. And it's about then kind of nurturing that project, whether it's people, whether it's the code, and doing what's right for the project. And sometimes we have our own little initiatives we're working on, your own particular feature or capability, or we might work for an organization that has capabilities that are wanted. But as a maintainer, you have to look broader than that, and you have to think about the project as a whole. So it might be about enabling something, making sure it's configurable so it can be used in many different ways, making sure it's current and kept up to date. Don't just leave in something to fester, go back and fix it. If you're dependent on something, sometimes that means jumping in and actually fixing it, because the priorities are driven by those of us that work on the project, adding other capabilities or things that we need. I think the review process and the discussion, so talking about how to make things better, reviewing PRs, giving feedback, helpful tips to new people when they come along, because everyone's going to be going through this. I remember, we were talking earlier this week about Git branches, in fact, just a minute ago, about the Git upstream. That took me quite a long time to get my head around, and it sounds silly because it's kind of quite simple, but it really does take quite a lot of practice and reinforcement, I think, sometimes to really appreciate that and understand how it works. Working on, as well as the code, how we improve the process, additional checks that we can do. I've spent quite a bit of time working with the build process and added some verifications in there, but it can manifest itself in many ways. Always, how can we, just do things a little bit better? If we notice problems, we hear other people talking about them, try and encourage them to raise their own issues. If that doesn't work, sometimes raise it on their behalf, but let's not lose that value that people have added. Working with other projects is great fun. I certainly feel value from that, even though it feels like a distraction. I mentioned the Java one earlier this week. We've also used products like, or components like Helm in the Kubernetes environment. We use Janus Graph for our graph store. And we have to be responsible to help them improve, I think, as well, as part of this much broader open source community, or Atlas, or any of those other products. So try and raise good bug reports, or raise ideas for new features. Sometimes it may even be that you create a pull request on those projects because you understand what the requirements are. So I think that's good. Mentioned again a minute ago, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. That was definitely a bit of a mental block, I think, at the beginning. We used to, trying to develop very high quality enterprise middleware in quite a well-defined process. And when we started Egeria, we didn't have a lot of that process, but we did have that history. So how do we put the benefits of both together? And I think part of that was always focused on making things better. But it doesn't mean that it has to be perfect. It needs to be open. You need to understand what you're doing and talk to other people about it, but it certainly doesn't need to be perfect. Myself, I've recently been doing quite a lot of work around the containers, Docker, Kubernetes, starting to look at operators, and also improving samples, build, automation. I did some initial work on the Python notebooks that you've seen, to just basically based off some earlier tutorials we ran where it was quite convoluted, so try and make that better, and look at the usability from a developer perspective as well as a maintainer perspective, trying to improve our processes. Those are my main things. I should add though, I'll echo that it's been probably the most exciting and interesting and enjoyable project that I've worked on. Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, it's great to hear. Both of you, thank you. So if you're, so if someone was thinking about being a maintainer, how much do they need to do you think, before that would be, that would be, a good, they would be able to put themselves forward as a maintainer.
And also, I'll just qualify that. Like, do you think it's 6 months? Is it a year? Is it, how long would it take?
I don't think it's time. I think it's to do with a couple of things. There's got to be some level of sustained activity, and probably across a variety of different areas. So it's probably proposing new changes and working through the development and review process on those. It's raising issues against other areas when they're found. It's engaging in broader team discussions. And as part of a maintainer's responsibility, it will become also part of looking at other things that are going on in the project and trying to draw connections between them and look at how we do things better. That maybe comes a little bit later, but I would say it would be quite a number of PRs and issues. It might be 6 months, but if someone's really focused on it, maybe it's 2 months. If it's very gradual progress, it may take longer, but there should be a significant amount of time that someone's able to spend working on the project as a maintainer, because just keeping up with things like PRs and reviewing issues, having that responsibility does cause, shall we say, some overhead over and above a particular code area. And I think that's the other thing. It's more than just about one code area. It might be specialized in one, but you should have some understanding and feedback on a much broader set.
Apache Atlas, they were talking about 14 commits. But I think they had to be reasonably meaty commits that you'd add to the. That seemed enough to show that you were respectful of the community, that you were going about things in a reasonable way. I don't think you need to be familiar with loads of areas, but I think if you're contributing in one area and have some respect for the other areas, then I think that's fine. And I don't think I agree with Nigel. It doesn't have to be 6 months. It might be 6 months if someone's respectful of the community and is making contributions and can be seen to be doing that. Then I think that's it could happen much quicker.
And just to add to that, there's a lot of value to be had around just contributing, and the project will see that as very valuable. So it doesn't mean that you're not contributing if you don't become a maintainer. Quite the opposite. You can do an awful lot of good for the project without being a maintainer.
So anything else we should be covering? Struggling switching on and off mute.
I noticed it gone quite quiet.
I wanted to give you a chance to talk, and so that was why I switched the mute button on. So the only other thing really is to look at the maintainer badge. It's a if I go through this again, to the operations guide. So the operations guide, the file called Egeria operations, which is right at the top of the GitHub repository, talks about these two roles, the contributor and the maintainer. And what we have here is the expectations of a maintainer. So the thing is, we have people who have done some fantastic work for us, but no longer work on the project. So we call them emeritus maintainer. And that's just basically saying that they're not currently actively processing pull requests and things like that, but we don't want to lose the fact that they have made important contributions in the past. So this maintainers list is here. So it's the maintainers in capital letters, .md in the top level Git. And this shows the people that we have currently as maintainers. And you can see we're quite a small group, but a good range of people from many different parts of many different countries and from different companies, which is extremely important. So the other thing that the other thing that you're not going to say, are you? Because I'm not sharing. The other thing we have are component owners. So most of the maintainers, I believe, are also component owners. And when you make a change to that component, to their component, they will be automatically assigned as a reviewer. So sometimes you see your things come in and there's a reviewer assigned. It's driven by the code owner part of the code owner file, and that includes the people who are the maintainers. So if I just go back, so we're looking about a quarter of your time on the project to maintain your maintainer status, so to speak. And a new maintainer is voted into the group when the group agreed, basically. So whereas the contributor, you only need one maintainer to say this person's making good contributions. To become part of the maintainer group, it's more of a group decision from the maintainers. So that's really where we are. Any questions on becoming a maintainer? You may think this word is strange if you come from the Apache world. We took a little while getting used to it. Whereas in the Apache world, a maintainer is called a committer, and they're exactly the same roles. They just have different names.
I guess it's probably worth saying that all communications pretty much that the maintainers have between each other and the rest of the community is all public. Probably the one exception would be the voting for a new maintainer, and also around security issues. So they're probably the only exceptions, but other than that, it's as open as it can be.
Yeah, and this is the real benefit of us being part of the ODPI rather than setting up as an independent group, because we have not only the fact that they provide us with our vendor neutral platform, but they're constantly monitoring us for diversity, for good practice, for having a maintaining their code of conduct. All that sort of thing really helps with the health of the community. Okay, so if there's nothing more on the maintainer, we can probably stop the recording.
There's just one question in the chat. What are the criteria? Okay. What are the criteria that assess a confirmed maintainer?
So basically, again, it's going to be that demonstration, the understanding. So there's not a hard rule, but it's that ability. It's what you're basically saying to the other maintainers is, do you trust this person with right access to the repository? That's fundamentally the question. And will they pull their weight in terms of helping people, contributors, bring content to the repository? So it's two parts. Are they safe, and will they help? That's the two big things. And so that's the reputation that you need to be building to come into the maintainer into the maintainer community.